Welcome to Custom Drupal Data Migrations, a Georgia GovHUB story. My name is April Sides. I am a senior developer at Lullabot. This was my first project with Lullabot because I've been there for about a year, and it was also my first migration, so I'm really excited to tell you all about it. Also the lead organizer of DrupalCamp Asheville, which is next July. If you're from Atlanta, it's a 3-hour drive, not too bad. And there are stickers at the registration desk if you're interested, and we'd love for you to join us next summer. So at Lullabot, we provide strategy, design, and Drupal development for large-scale publishers. So if you're interested in working with us, we can chat. So I want to start out by talking about the migration team from the Lullabot side. Karen Stevenson, our director of technology, has a lot of migration experience and was very instrumental in providing a lot of guidance on how we approach the migration. Marcus Cano did all the file migrations, and he also helped with keeping our code clean and organized, and provided a lot of knowledge and experience as well. And Darren Peterson, he's senior technology technical project manager, was our fearless leader and kept the process going and was very instrumental as well. And James Sansbury was responsible for our DevOps magic, so it really helps make our work possible. I also want to give a shout out to the Digital Services Georgia team. They're probably one of my favorite clients, of course, not just because they're in the room, but yeah, I really enjoyed working with them. So what we're going to cover is discovery and planning, strategies and workflow, and what I'm calling magical nerdery, some things that hopefully I can convey with words and you will understand. So there's some really crazy problems that we solved during this migration, and we'll talk about some of those. So discovery and planning. In migration, you look at a migration as a source and a destination. So the source in this case was Drupal 7, and it was multi-site, and there were 85 plus sites that we were going to be migrating. Each of those sites has its own database, so that made it a little bit easier. It was hosted on Acquia. There were 27 content types, 15 of which we migrated, so not all of the content was migrated. There were 14 taxonomy vocabularies, and we only migrated 9 of them. And it had the architecture of paragraphs, field collections, and entity embeds. The destination site was a Drupal 8 multi-site, and we did the migration in phases, about 6 sites at a time. So we started with the first 6, sort of the MVP, and then that way those processes, because all the content structure was the same with all the sites for the most part. There were some special cases, and they were each using them maybe in different ways, but once we migrated a site, we could migrate all of them and then just handle edge cases. It is also hosted on Acquia. There were 20 content types, so in the upgrade, they took a look at the architecture and redid it all, right? Like re-evaluated how they want to use the content and how everything should work. So that's another reason why this was a very custom migration. There were 17 taxonomy vocabularies, 10 of which we populated. And we used the concept of micro content types, which are, it's micro content, it's a node, but we made sure that you couldn't see it as a standalone content. It was only embedded or referenced by other content. So to start out, Karen Stevenson has a script that will pull out all the field instances for the Drupal 7 site. So it gives you an idea of the entity type, the bundle, field name. It's a really long spreadsheet, but really was instrumental in identifying what fields from Drupal 7 we're going to be migrating to Drupal 8. At the same time, we had a content strategy team that was creating the new architecture for the Drupal 8 site. So they were providing these data dictionaries and content model documentation, which were instrumental in identifying the destination fields in Drupal 8. And these were also used to manually create the content types in Drupal 8 because we did not migrate that content. So this is a document that I created. It's very small on the screen here, but basically to track the field mappings for each of these content types. And we did it in sort of a phased approach. So we looked at all the content types and we migrated all the basic fields and that sort of thing. So this was really good to kind of figure out the path and the status of each of these fields and content types. And I also want to share this document, and it's kind of blurry here, isn't it? But I'm kind of iterating on that approach to the previous document. This document is more based on the concept of taking what Karen's done to get all the field instances and building on that to figure out, to focus more on the field mappings and the field migration rather than the content type itself. And then, this course is going to have a lot of duplication on the left, and it's going to be a really long document, but you can create data filter views. So I create a data filter view for each content type so that whenever you're looking at, say, an event, you're only seeing the fields for an event, but then you can also see the status of each field. So another tool that we created before the migration actually kicked off was a drush command that we called SQuealer. Hashtag naming things is fun, right? So SQuealer is a drush 9 command in a Drupal 8 module, and it runs queries on the Drupal 7 database. And mostly it was to inform any sort of migration logic that we needed to handle. It could identify problems in Drupal 7 that could be fixed in Drupal 7 prior to the migration. So we're looking for things like image tags, absolute links, a variety of different things we were looking for. And as the migration process continued, we added more things. So we had like meta tag queries that we wanted to see if any overrides had been added. We even had like find the specific field values, like is this data consistent? How can we maybe break it apart and put it where it needs to be? Or is it not consistent? Maybe we need a different strategy there. So the command just runs drush and then the site alias and then the environment. If we're running it locally or running it on a different environment. And the command is just squeal. And you can actually tell it to run specific scans, but we only use the squeal because we wanted to generate this report. So it generates an Excel file in the site's files directory in a folder called GA SQuealer reports. And this file looks a little bit like this. So each of the scans that were in the list before have its own tab. And if there are no results for the tab or for the scan, then the tab doesn't show up. So this was really great in sort of discovering the content. And each of these, the goal of this was to trace any of the issues that we found back to its node. So you could go to the node, edit the node, or investigate it or fix it in Drupal 7. All right, so strategies and workflow as far as migration was concerned. We had things that we did not migrate, and we had things that we did migrate. So we did not migrate structural elements. We didn't migrate the content types or the field definitions. We didn't migrate the actual vocabularies. We didn't migrate the paragraph and field collection bundles as entities. We didn't do views, and we didn't do web form submissions. What we did migrate were the data elements. So for select content types and select nodes, we migrated the data from those nodes and the field data specifically. Select taxonomy terms, so we might take them out of the vocabulary and put them in a completely different vocabulary in Drupal 8. We migrated menus, web forms, and files. So as far as the migration modules that we used for this project, we used the core migrate and migrate Drupal modules. We also used an array of contributed modules, migrate files, migrate plus, all of those. I included migrate source UI on here. It's kind of a lightweight module that we use to provide a solution for the client to be able to import content during and after the migration. So it was not part of our core site migration, but it allowed us to create migrations for them to use as importers, So that's why we also have a custom module that kind of coincides with that. and provide some of the customization and the migrations that actually they can select and actually import CSV files. We also have our main migrate module was GA migrate, and then we have a secondary one, GA migrate site, that we use for site-specific overrides, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So our development tools, we primarily use Lando. Our QA environment is TUGBOAT QA. That is a Lullabot product. In our DevOps magic, we use Circle CI and Key. Key was used to manage containers for Docker for Lando so that we could get our databases and files as you move from phase to phase. And the Circle CI stuff, James does some magic. He's amazing. All right, so TUGBOAT is a Lullabot product, and this was my first time using it. And the coolest thing that I think about using this is that when you submit a PR, it stands up the site as if you merged it. So you can actually review your PRs without having to turn over your local development environment. So it made things go a lot faster, and it was also very much integrated into the migration process. So we would do the migrations on a TUGBOAT, and then the client would go through and review those and QA those, let us know of edge cases or any other issues that they found. So it was very, very much part of the workflow. So our development workflow is that we focused on field mappings by complexity and content type. So like I was saying, let's say we're migrating a blog post. The first pass at this blog post, we're only going to include the mappings for the basic fields. We're going to submit a PR, we're going to get that reviewed, get it merged. Then we're going to take a second pass later on, and if it has any rich fields or file fields or image fields, any of these things, we're going to handle that later. And that way the client can continue to see progress. They can say, oh, okay, now I'm seeing these content types come over, even if it's just the basic data. And that allowed us to kind of compartmentalize the complexity and go on from there. As far as our development strategy, we worked on the migration configuration files directly in the config sync directory. We didn't do any sort of importing between the module and the site. We preserved node IDs for standalone content, so anything that was going to be standalone content needed to have the same ID. We migrated unpublished content to help with the menu migration. We didn't want a lot of broken links. We prioritized the ability to roll back and re-import the content because we're doing 6 sites at a time. Each of these sites is going to migrate on its own. We wanted the ability to go, bring the data in. If there's an issue, we can just roll it all back out, try it again. And so we didn't use things like entity generate, which will create content during the migration process, but then it can't be rolled back. So we were very cognizant of that. We used the GA migrate site module for site-specific overrides. And we had a custom logging solution that allowed us to log skips or exceptions along the way so that we could keep track of what was happening for troubleshooting the edge cases. And our solution order is we tried to do everything we could in the configuration with core and contrib, process plugins, and source plugins. And if we couldn't do it with that, then we would create our own custom source and process plugins or services that our plugins could also share in the GA migrate module. And if we couldn't fix the problem that way, we did use hook migrate migration ID prepare row to kind of hook into the process. But we wanted to prioritize sort of in this order. So the custom logging solution was very key in being able to do troubleshooting after the migration. I mean, we're migrating a lot of sites at a time, and so Marcos Cano actually put this together. It just created a custom table and then a way to export that data. We had this function, so anywhere in our site we could run this function, GA migrate log. We could provide a detailed message where we would typically put like file IDs if something was skipped or anything that's going to help us identify what happened here. And also where it happened. So like what migration is running when this happened. What is the audience? Is this something that more the client needs to see or a developer needs to see to fix? Does it need to be fixed? So some things we just wanted to make sure that things happened or know that it happened. But some things did need to be fixed. And we've got severity and a short descriptor of category and of course the current row ID, the current item that is being migrated. So with the drush command, this sort of file would be generated and we would import it into Google Sheets. So we could do searches based on a node. So like we have a node that is missing a link in its link collection. What happened there? So we can just do a quick search. We can look at specific migrations. This was very helpful for troubleshooting the migrations after they run. So how do you migrate 85 plus sites, right? The answer is in phases. And the sites are still currently being migrated. So what a migration phase looks like is using TUGBOAT as sort of that QA point. We add the new sites for the new phase and remove the old sites to save on resources, because you're talking about databases and files and all that. So you want to focus on the group that you're migrating. You run the migrations on TUGBOAT, and then the client would QA the migrations on TUGBOAT. So they would go page by page, very, very good QA people over there. And if there were any edge cases or any issues that we needed to fix programmatically, then we would handle those. So the development team would fix any issues that were found. And then the migrations run on production. And because not all the content is being migrated, there is a period after we run the migrations on production where the client can add content and migrate anything that needed to be migrated manually at that point. And they prepare the site for launch, and then the sites launch. And I believe this happens on like a 2-week period, overlapping other phases. So it's kind of a well-oiled machine at this point, I think. I don't know. But Media Current's actually taken over the running of the migration phase, or phases, and are troubleshooting the migration. All right, magical nerdery. So Karen told me that this was probably the most complex migration she's ever been a part of. And it's really because the content structure changed. And not all migrations are going to be this difficult. But I tried to pick out some things that I thought you all would find intriguing and maybe a little bit mind-blowing, but we'll see if I can explain it, what's in my head, to your head, and you'll understand it. So for the site-specific overrides, we have multi-site. So if a specific site says, maybe they want to skip a certain node that's going to become a view, we used the GA migrate site module. So I'm going to give credit to Karen for this particular solution. So what we had a GA migrate site module in sort of the high-level modules directory. And that module was basically empty. There was an interface file that had some default values that are used during the migration process, but it's meant to be pretty basic. If a site needs to override within or hook into the migration process, they can copy the GA migrate site module into the site-specific module directory. So then they can make any overrides, right? So the GA migrate module, our main module, runs first as far as the order of the module weight. So GA migrate's going to run first, and then we can override things with GA migrate site. And this is really the only code that is in the default module. So it's an interface that names some constants and has some values. In this case, for the first two, the default is that we're going to unpublish press releases that are older than 3 years. So if a site didn't want to do that, they can override these values, or they can change them and modify them specifically for their site. And then we had the site skip list. So that was a list of nodes that might need to be skipped for a specific site. And then the .module file for GA migrate site in the default module is empty. But you can implement any of the hook migrate prepare row, hook migrate ID, migration ID prepare row. You can do any of that in the .module file. And because you have because the module is living in the site-specific directory, that is the one that Drupal is going to see for that site. Otherwise, it's always going to see the default. So that's why we have to have the interface that still has the default values, because if we didn't, they wouldn't exist. All right, how we doing? That was the easy one. Okay, so nested paragraphs. In the Drupal 7 site, there were a number of what I called container paragraphs. So the field would mostly hold a container paragraph, where there'd be 1, 2, 3, 4 column, and those paragraphs then held the content paragraphs. So content references, images, related links, etc. So if we were to look at a node, just as a broad example here, the node has a field called field content. And that field holds the container paragraphs, 2 column or 1 column. And within that, you can see the content paragraphs that are like related links or images and that sort of thing. So our strategy for paragraphs were to convert the paragraphs into Drupal 8 markup, including entity embeds if it needed to become an entity embed, and was to stack that content in the body field during the migration. So this is, let's see, this is like a pseudo field that you can use in your migration configuration. It's kind of a temporary field. I kind of think of it as a custom variable that you can use. So we use the pseudo field to process field content with a custom process plugin. And so I kind of talk about this process as rendering. So when I say rendering, I don't mean how did the paragraph render in Drupal 7, but more like what does the content look like or need to look like for Drupal 8. So I had lots of methods in the service that for each paragraph, what does this content need to look like? And it kind of, in quotes, renders that content. So does it need to be text markup? Does it need to be an entity embed? File download, does it need some alignment adjustments like on the container paragraphs? And how this would work is we used a recursive function. So our goal was to drill down to a content paragraph. So in this case, the first rendered paragraph would be within the first container and then the first actual content paragraph. So we render that. Maybe that becomes a link collection. And then we render the next one, which is the image. And then we come out back to the container and render that content, whether this, maybe this needs to be aligned left or right, that sort of thing. Then we go to the next one, 1 column, and then into it to the content paragraph. Back out, what does the 1 column look like with that content now? And then once we've gone through all of the paragraphs, we concatenate all those strings together for field content. How we doing? All right. So once we have our markup from the pseudo field, we can then concatenate it with the body. There's a plugin, and I can't remember if it's Core or with Migrate Plus, but there's a concatenation plugin where you can take different strings and stack them in order. And so with our prepared field content pseudo field, we can add that to the top of the body field. All right. Circular dependencies. What do I mean by circular dependencies? So this would be an example of migrating a site page, and a site page had a field-related links field. But we wanted to convert that content into an embedded link collection, and the link collection it's one of those micro content types I was talking about before. So the idea is that we want a migration that will only migrate field-related links into a link collection, and then we're going to run the site page migration so that we can then take that and say, oh, there's the link collection that's been created. Now we're going to embed it in our body field. So here's just sort of an example. After the link collection has been created by the previous migration, the site page migration is using the node ID, is doing a migration lookup to find the link collection that was created, a custom process plugin to create that entity embed code, adds it to the body field, and then migrates it to a topic page in Drupal 8. So this is a little bit of what the pseudo field looked like for field-related links in the site page. So this is the lookup to find that link collection and then embed it in the body field. So it's doing a migration lookup to that field-related links migration based on the node ID of the current row. And then we have a custom plugin that is going to get the entity embed code. And then like before, we concatenated it to the bottom of the body field in this case. So the dependencies look a little bit like this. So the site page is dependent on the field-related links migration because that link collection needs to exist so that we can embed it, right? But what happens is it gets tricky when the site page actually has another site page in its field-related links. So it's referencing content that we haven't migrated yet. And if this runs in this fashion, the link is not going to make it to Drupal 8. It's going to be null. So missing links, edge cases that caught this, right? So what we added to, I believe this was added to the field-related links migration, we added a pseudo field, but in this case, we're actually not using the value of the pseudo field. We just want it to create stubbed content in Drupal 8. So the migration engine has this ability to create stubbed nodes that it's just basically, if you're migrating the node ID, it creates the node and it just has like gobbledygook title. And then when the site page migration happens, all the data will be filled in. So it just creates basically a reference, a little placeholder. So in this case, we're going through the field-related links field, and we actually, this ... because presentations, actually says, does this particular link is it referencing content? Because you could have just a text and URL link as well. So if it is referencing content, let's see if the site page exists in that migration for site page. If not, let's create a stubbed item for it. So in that case, the migration can run, and the site page reference will be referencing a new topic page, and then the site page migration will then fill in the actual data for it. So the tricky part here is that in the stub process and field-related links, we are talking about the site page migration, which makes it a dependency of the field-related links migration. So as you remember, site page is dependent on field-related links, but now field-related links depends on the site page because of running the migration lookup plugin. So it works if that site page, that main migration is alphabetically before the field-related links migration ID, right? Crazy. And I think, I don't know exactly why that is, but it probably has something to do with how the migration process just identifies the IDs that are there. It does not work if it is alphabetically after. So we ran into a case where we have index list, we're doing the same kind of naming scheme, but node index list, that one is going to show up later. And I'm like, why isn't this working? We're doing the same thing as the site page migration, pull out here. So the fix or hack is that we put a number 1 in the migration name to put it higher in the alphabetical order. So that works. I did create an issue on Drupal.org. This is probably a very edge case issue, but if anybody else ran into it, or if there is a way to identify that this migration exists in the process, I wanted to at least bring it up. So WYSIWYG DOM Processing. So we had a thing where we called it WYSIWYG Cleanup. We actually did this using regular expressions at first, and then there is now, in the latest version of Migrate Plus, there's a DOM process plugin that will take markup, convert it to the document object model, which is a way better way of seeing what the content is and removing and replacing content. And then it converts it back to markup. So we sort of sandwiched our custom process plugin between the DOM import and the DOM export. But the document object in PHP is a black box. You can't use Xdebug to see the elements. It's not developer friendly, I would say. But if they did show all that data, it would probably crash our machines. So we'll take it, right? So the way to handle it is you want to get the elements from the document object model. There is a method for that. You want to loop through those elements and collect the items that need to be altered, replaced, or removed in an array. And then in another loop, you want to loop through that collection array and do the actual altering of, or alter, replacing, and removing of content. Because if you try to alter, replace, or remove content during the collection phase, it causes all sort of havoc in the document object model. You start kind of losing, like it doesn't know where things are. So this is just sort of a basic example of what I'm talking about. So we have an elements array, or an elements variable that we are using get element by tag name, and using the asterisk gives you all the elements. So you may have a need to go through all of the elements, but you could say you want to see all the divs, or you want to see all the A tags, things like that. So I initialize an array called remove elements, and if elements length is greater than 0, that means that there are elements to loop through. We're going to go through each element, and I kind of put a comment here. You would have a condition, like, you know, why are we removing the div? Is it like we're removing all the divs of a certain class or something like that? And if so, we collect it in our remove elements array, and then after that process has happened, we're going to loop through the elements that we want to affect and run a process. And this remove element and content is actually a custom method that I created so that if there were issues with the way that that was happening, I can do it in one place and then just reference it throughout the code. So what do we do with WYSIWYG cleanup? We converted Drupal 7 embedded entities into the Drupal 8 embed entity syntax. We replaced image tags with embedded media entities. Links to files, we changed to an actual download link. Iframes, which included embedded YouTube videos. So if it was a YouTube video, we would convert that to an embedded media entity. If it was some custom code, we would create a code block and embed that. And then just basic general text filtering based on the text format of the Drupal 8 field. So if the Drupal 8 field doesn't, in this case, accept a table, we need to strip the table out and just make sure, or at least know there was a table that was stripped out, because that's another thing, right? So when you migrate the data's there in Drupal 8, but maybe the WYSIWYG editor isn't going to show you the table because it's not allowed in that particular field. So we tried to at least identify if a table was removed or going to basically not show because that field is not going to show a table. We made it. We made it through the magical nerdery. So if you're interested in more about the Georgia.gov project, there were a couple of presentations at GovCon this year. One was by Darren Peterson, sort of a high-level case study, and one by Mark Drummond. It talks about the front-end funness, all the cool stuff they did there. And if you're interested in learning more about migration from Lullabot, we have a podcast where Karen and I and Wampy chatted about migration woes, I guess, or just talked a little bit about migration. And Wampy's got a couple of recent articles about migration, and there will be more to come because I need to write some stuff about migration. So thank you. And if you have any questions, that's what we're going to do now. Yeah.
And as part of the WYSIWYG cleanup, well, previously you mentioned there were these container paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
I think you impacted layout, I imagine.
Yeah.
Was that a part of the WYSIWYG cleanup, or how did you account for the layout?
So that was part of the nested paragraphs. So how did we handle the container paragraphs in the migration? Okay, so it was in that process with the nested paragraphs. Let me see if I can shoot back to that slide. So when it was rendered, let's say this particular one, the related links was going to become a link collection. So that's an embedded node. So we get embedded code when we render that. And then there's an image. We get the media entity embed code there. And let's say in Drupal 7, there was something that told us that maybe the image is supposed to be on the left side and the links are supposed to be on the right. So we would look for things like that. And so in the method that we use to render two columns, we're looking for that and adding the alignment snippets to the code. So like I think the embed code had sort of some attributes that were align left or right or full, that sort of thing. And so that's why we would actually have a method that would render the container so that we can handle alignments kind of stuff.
You would add those alignment classes to through the markup that was saved through
Right.
the rich text field.
Right. And then in some cases where there were like a 3-column, we didn't have that in our design for Drupal 8, I don't think. I don't think we had, or 4-column. We didn't have that capability. The idea is that we wanted that content to stack. And so that's how we, decided it should be rendered. It had nothing to do, or not as much to do with what was rendered in Drupal 7 and more about what it needs to look like in Drupal 8.
So maybe you regarded some of that, but disregarded some of it.
Right. Yeah.
Another question about sort of like the architectural decisions about, so you had structured content using paragraphs of 7, but we're going to a new architectural model using rich text. And where was that, what was that decision like, or was that just part of the project?
So that directive, so the directive of what to do with the paragraphs and our strategy on handling paragraphs and stacking them in the body field, that was a directive that came from the content strategy team. They looked into other solutions and they just decided that paragraphs wasn't going to be a good fit for this particular case. And so we just operated on that understanding. Yeah. Yeah. Yes?
Do you have any sense or get any numbers about what their kind of time per node or time per record was?
I did not. It didn't blow up our machines. I mean, that was one of the things that I was concerned about early on was, how heavy is this process going to be? But I didn't run the time. We should in the future. But yeah, it didn't crash the machine. It worked. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for coming.